22.15 billion naira. That is what the federal government of Nigeria has set aside in the 2026 budget to build, renovate, and furnish 106 royal palaces across this country. And of that amount, 11 projects worth 5.85 billion naira have no identified physical location at all. Read that again slowly. Almost 6 billion naira of your money is assigned to palaces that the budget document itself cannot place on a map. Not a delayed project, not an abandoned project, a project with no stated address. It gets worse. According to the accountability organization Tracka, not one of the 45 ministries, departments, and agencies assigned to execute these royal palaces has the legal or statutory mandate to build royal structures. The money was instead routed through research institutes, agricultural colleges, and specialized health facilities. So, an agricultural research council is building palaces in Kogi. A horticultural research institute is handling Emir's palaces in Niger State. A science and technology complex in Abuja is furnishing what the budget calls national heritage palaces. Today, we are going to walk through the actual line items, name the agencies, and answer the one question that matters. How did this survive the National Assembly? Stay with me. If you are new to the Policy Pulse HQ, this channel reads the budget documents other channels only talk about. Subscribe now, watch the full breakdown here on this channel. This short only gave you half the story, and stay with me because we have been tracking this exact budget since the church allocation story. Where 22 billion naira actually went. Let us go through the specific numbers because the detail is the entire story here. Vague outreach changes nothing. Named line items are much harder for anyone to explain away. On Wednesday, July 22, 2026, Tracka, which is an arm of the BudgIT Foundation, released its review of the 2026 Appropriation Act. The review found that 22.15 billion naira was earmarked for the construction, renovation, and furnishing of 106 royal palace buildings nationwide. The projects include palace halls, furniture, solar power installations, and boreholes. The Nigerian Building and Road Research Institute in Lagos was assigned project valued at 3.92 billion naira. That figure includes 1 billion naira for pavilions and solar power at the Oluyin Palace in Iyin, Ekiti, and 525 million naira for a palace hall in Ojo, Lagos. A road research institute is now responsible for palace pavilions. The Nigerian Cooperative College in Ibadan was tasked with a 2.661 billion naira project for the renovation of community halls and palaces in selected communities. The Sheda Science and Technology Complex in Abuja was allocated 1.54 billion naira under the Federal Ministry of Science, Technology and Innovation for the modernization and furnishing of what the document describes as selected national heritage palaces. The Agricultural Research Council of Nigeria received 750 million naira for the completion and furnishing of 4 palaces in Kogi State. The National Institute for Hospitality and Tourism was allocated 700 million naira for palace and office projects in Plateau State. The Nigerian Horticultural Research Institute in Ibadan was slotted for 560 million naira for Emir's palaces in Niger State, 350 million naira for the Etsunupe Palace in Bida, and 175 million naira in Obokun and Oriade, Osun State. The Lower Niger River Basin Development Authority was earmarked 175 million naira to complete the Ogoga Palace Hall in Ikere, Ekiti. The National Directorate of Employment, whose job is finding Nigerians work, was assigned 150 million naira for a palace in Oba Koko, Ondo State. And here's one line that connects this story directly to the biggest political event on the calendar right now. The National Center for Technology Management in Ile-Ife was tasked with 150 million naira for the Atauja of Osogbo Palace. Osun State goes to the polls on August 15th, 16 days from the day we are filming this. Now hold all of that beside the religious allocations from the same budget, which we covered on this channel already. Tracka found 8.05 billion naira set aside for worship centers, made up of 1.91 billion naira across 7 church projects and 6.14 billion naira across 52 mosque projects. Add the palaces and the worship centers together and you arrive at 30.15 billion naira in a single budget cycle. All of that sits inside a budget carrying a 31.45 trillion naira deficit. That is the context. Borrowed money, palace furniture, solar panels for royal courts, and 11 projects nobody can find. What Tracka actually found? Let us be precise about what the accountability review established, because there are 3 separate problems here, and people keep collapsing them into one. The first failure is location. 11 palace projects worth 5.85 billion naira have no identified physical location in the budget document. Without an address, no citizen, no journalist, and no oversight committee can go and verify whether anything was ever built. That is not a small clerical issue. That is the single feature that makes independent tracking impossible. The second failure is mandate. None of the 45 ministries, departments, and agencies assigned these projects has the legal or statutory authority to construct royal structures. A Cereals Research Institute has no business supervising palace construction, and if something goes wrong, there is no internal expertise to catch it because supervising palace projects is not what those institutions were built to do. The third failure is procurement. By routing palace money through unrelated research institutes, agricultural colleges, and health facilities, the spending bypassed the standard scrutiny it would have faced inside an agency whose actual mandate covers construction. Each of these 3 failures is serious on its own. Together, they describe a spending pathway that is almost impossible to audit from the outside. Why the missing addresses matter more than the amount. Here is the part most commentary is getting wrong. Everyone is shouting about 22 billion naira, but the amount is not actually the most damaging finding in this review. 22 billion naira in a budget this size is recoverable, arguable even, defensible if somebody wanted to make the case for it seriously. What is not defensible is a project with no address. A missing location is not a difference of opinion about priorities. It is a structural hole in the accountability chain, and it converts a spending decision into an unverifiable one permanently. Once a project has no stated location, the question of whether the money was well spent can never be answered by anybody outside the room where it was approved. That is why the 5.85 billion naira figure deserves more attention than the 22.15 billion naira headline, and it is the number I would put in front of any official who agrees to answer questions about this. Is the federal government even allowed to do this? The strongest objection raised so far is not about waste. It is about power, and specifically about whether Abuja has any constitutional business funding palaces at all. Former Vice President Atiku Abubakar, now the presidential candidate of the African Democratic Congress, described the allocation as a constitutional aberration. In a statement issued through his senior special assistant on public communication, Frank Shaiba, Atiku argued that the 1999 Constitution as amended sets out the distribution of governmental responsibilities clearly, and that it does not give the federal government responsibility for constructing or renovating palaces belonging to traditional institutions. He went further, calling the appropriation, in his words, a blank check for corruption. Atiku also made a specific and testable demand. His office said the federal government has refused to name the traditional rulers involved or disclose where the 106 palaces are located, and called on the presidency and the budget office to publish the full details along with the legal basis for the spending. That is a request that can be satisfied in one afternoon with one document, which is exactly what makes it effective as a political demand. The criticism is not coming only from the opposition presidential candidate. Chief Chekwas Okorie, the founding national chairman of the All Progressives Grand Alliance, called on the National Assembly to investigate the allocation. Okorie argued that the welfare and administration of traditional rulers falls primarily to state and local governments rather than to the federal government, and he criticized the National Assembly for approving the allocation without adequate scrutiny at a time of serious economic strain. The coalition of united political parties has faulted the allocation as well. The question nobody is asking the legislature. Here is what almost every reaction to this story has missed, and it is the reason this is not simply another Tinubu story. Everyone is directing this at the presidency and at the budget office, and both certainly have questions to answer. But an Appropriation Act is not written by the president alone. It is scrutinized, amended, and passed by the National Assembly before it is signed. So the real question is not only how these lines were drafted, it is how 469 federal legislators reviewed a budget containing 11 projects with no stated location and passed it anyway. Either the Appropriation Committee saw those lines and approved them, which is a decision they should be asked to defend publicly, or they did not see them, which tells you the scrutiny process is not functioning at the level Nigerians are paying for. Notice that Okorie, an opposition figure, went directly at the National Assembly rather than only at the presidency. That is the more uncomfortable line of questioning, and it is the one least likely to be pursued because it implicates lawmakers across every party rather than one administration. Drop a comment right now with one word. Should the federal government fund palace renovation at all? Yes or no? Not whether this specific budget is corrupt, that is a different question. Should Abuja be in the palace business in the first place? One word, I am reading these. There is one more dimension worth naming honestly, and it is the one that connects to our earlier church allocation video. Writing in the cable this week, one analysis pointed out that when the Deputy Speaker of the House of Representatives, Benjamin Kalu, clarified that his office had allocated 780 million naira, not 1 billion naira, for evangelical instrument and youth reorientation through churches in his Bende constituency, the criticism was immediate. The same piece asked how that is fundamentally different from public funds spent on Hajj sponsorship and mosque construction elsewhere in the country. That comparison applies directly to the palace money too. Traditional institutions in Nigeria carry enormous cultural and religious weight in both the north and the south, and outrage about public money flowing toward them tends to soften considerably depending on whose institution is receiving it. If we are going to hold this line, we have to hold it in every direction, and this channel intends to. The strongest case for the other side. Let us give the strongest available defense of this spending a fair hearing, because there is a real argument here and pretending otherwise would be dishonest. The first defense is that traditional rulers perform genuine governance functions that the state depends on. Monarchs and emirs resolve land disputes, mediate communal conflicts before they escalate, mobilize communities for immunization and census exercises, and in many parts of this country, they are the earliest source of security intelligence available to the authorities. In many communities, the Palace Hall is the only functioning public assembly building there is. Funding that infrastructure is not automatically a waste, and anyone arguing otherwise has to explain what replaces it. The second defense is procedural. Constituency and zonal intervention projects have been routed through federal agencies for many years across multiple administrations and both major parties. A project appearing under an agency with an irrelated mandate is a well-documented weakness of the Nigerian budget system generally, not something invented in 2026. If that is the objection, the honest target is the entire constituency project architecture, not this single line. The third defense is the most important one to state clearly. A budget line is not proof that money was stolen. Tracka has documented a disclosure and mandate problem, and that is a serious and legitimate finding, but it is not the same thing as establishing that funds were misappropriated. It is entirely possible that some of these projects have real locations that were simply recorded badly in the budget document, which would be an indictment of the budget office rather than evidence of theft. So let us be exact about what we are saying and what we are not. We are not saying anyone has stolen 22 billion naira, and we are not saying any traditional ruler did anything wrong, because no monarch drafted this budget. What we are saying is that a spending decision of this size, executed through agencies with no mandate to carry it out, with 11 projects carrying no location at all, cannot be verified by the public who are paying for it. The remedy for that is publication, not accusation, and that is precisely what Atiku's demand asks for. 4 signals for the weeks ahead. Here is exactly what to watch as this develops, and each of these is checkable so you can hold this channel to it. The first signal is whether the Budget Office or the Presidency publishes the full list of the 106 palaces with locations attached. That is a single document. It either appears or it does not, and if it does not appear within a reasonable window, that silence is itself the answer. Watch specifically for whether the 11 unlocated projects are given addresses. The second signal is whether the National Assembly opens any formal inquiry following Okorie's call. Watch whether an appropriation committee in either chamber agrees to explain how these lines passed review, and watch whether any inquiry that is announced actually holds a public sitting or quietly disappears after the news cycle moves on. The third signal is whether any of the executing agencies speaks. So far, the response has come almost entirely from politicians and civil society, and not from the research institutes and colleges now formally responsible for building palaces. If a road research institute or an agricultural college publicly explains how it intends to supervise palace construction, that is genuinely informative. Continued silence from every one of the 45 agencies is informative too. The fourth signal is whether this becomes a live campaign issue rather than a one-week outrage cycle. Atiku has already attached it to his platform, and there is an election in Osun on August the 15th, in a state that appears in these palace allocations. Watch whether opposition candidates carry this number into their campaigns or whether it fades the way the SUV allocation debate did, because the difference between those two outcomes tells you how much accountability journalism actually moves Nigerian politics.
Here is where this leaves us. 22.15 billion naira for 106 palaces. 11 of those projects worth 5.85 billion naira with no location anyone can check. 45 agencies executing work, none of them has a mandate to execute. Add the 8.05 billion naira for worship centers from the same budget, and you are looking at 30.15 billion naira inside a budget carrying a 31.45 trillion naira deficit. None of that is an allegation, and none of it comes from this channel. Every figure in this video comes from a published review of a public document that the National Assembly passed and the President signed. That is the part Nigerians should sit with. This was not hidden, it was printed, and it went through every stage of scrutiny our system provides and came out the other side intact. The demand on the table is not complicated and it is not partisan. Publish the 106 locations, name the executing agencies and the legal basis for each project. Until that document exists, every one of these lines remains unverifiable, and unverifiable public spending is how 30 billion naira becomes a headline this year and a forgotten line item next year. This channel will be watching for that list. If this gave you the numbers instead of just the noise, send it to one Nigerian who still thinks the budget is too complicated to follow. Like this video, subscribe to ThePolicyPulseHQ, and tell me in the comments, should Abuja be funding palaces at all? I will see you in the next one.